Hello, Internet. I am live again for another day of Odinmade Hero. Make sure I put my phone on silent so that we don't interrupt the process. Welcome back for another day of the series where I learn from Casey Muratori as he programs Handmade Hero in C and C++ while I do it in Odin. On Friday, we kind of ended on an anticlimactic note, which happens. You know, sometimes you get through a whole day of code and then you go to compile to see if all those changes were done successfully. And you're really, really close, but not quite there. And Friday was another day like that. We had this issue where we were tripping this cert after working on that simulation region change for a few days to kind of move our entity system into this notion of treating bits of the world and iterating over the entities inside of those different bits of the world, or chunks, I guess I should say, because we're iterating over world chunks in each kind of region and simulating the state updates to all the entities in that region. And we were wrapping up that change when I started hitting this cert, and I was saying at the end of that stream that it's the kind of thing where if I'm not able to find the issue quickly, I could easily spend several hours trying to figure it out. So I said something to the effect of like, it'll either take 5 minutes or 5 hours. And thankfully it was a case where it took 5 minutes, because right before the stream ended and we started hitting this cert, we also saw that I was hitting, an issue in here. If I can figure out where that was. Oh, it's going to be like entity count, right? I thought I got rid of this. I don't know why that's still there. I'll get rid of that. It was like here when we're starting to iterate over all the entities so that we can render them. Yeah, right here. So I changed this loop up because we were basically iterating past the count of the number of entities in a given region. And then we were starting to do stuff with what was essentially all of the remaining entities, which were technically null entities after the index at the count, right? Because if we're not filling the entire slice, so once you get past the count, then there's, you're just using the memory that's there, but none of it is initialized. They're all null entities. So I saw that and fixed that, and then I started printing out some of the entity positions. I started printing out the entity types that were being having their position passed into this change entity location procedure. And I saw that we were, I think, printing out more non-entities, I think, or it might have been the sword. I can't remember, because we added the sword. Sword. It's basically a rock that we throw at the monster entity, the one monster that we have right now. But long story short, I saw that and I thought that basically looks like the same bug. And down in the end sim code, we were doing the same exact thing. So it really was the exact same bug by getting rid of that and then just taking out the entity at that index in the loop, rather than just pulling the entity straight out of here, because that doesn't, we could do a thing where we say, if we're at an index that's greater than the total entity count, then we break the loop. But I just think that's not very, that's not an elegant way to handle that, right? And I think the fact that I'm running into this in multiple places does tell me that we probably want to implement this to do at some point, where we're just using a dynamic array to put together the list of entities in a sim region. There's also this to do for using just a regular Odin map to store the hash stuff. So we have basically like a dictionary or a map, a hash of entities that just pertain to their storage key that are inside of the sim region. And, you know, I'm really, this kind of pertains to the to-do that Casey added, where he said, do we really want to hash for this? I honestly don't understand, because we have this list, right? And I guess we fill it with all the entities that are in that space in the world, but we also need to keep this hash around. And that might have more to do with like the storage and the loading of entity references than, and in fact, it almost certainly has to do with that, right? Because that's the only time where we start dealing with that. But by moving this into a map, it'll give me, I think, a better understanding of what's going on here. Because right now it's just an array, right? But we index into it using that kind of hashing indexing. I don't know how, I don't have the right words for this, but anyway, there's a whole lot of stuff going on here. But the main thing that I wanted to get across here in the first few minutes of the stream was that we now are in the same place as Casey, which is that I can actually run the thing again. But we have the same issue that he has, which is good, because that's where we wanted to be heading into today's day of code. And the issue that we have now, that Casey also has, is that when I try to drop the player in and spawn in, we hit that assert again. And this time, I'm pretty sure that is actually on the sword, right? So if we go back into the world code, what's happening is, and I think there's a to-do in here that was added at the end of that day of Handmade Hero on day 65. Maybe it's just this right here, right? If this moves an entity into the camera bounds, oh no, right here. If it moves out of the camera bounds, should it be removed from the high set? So basically, actually, maybe this doesn't have to do with this. Maybe the to-do I was thinking of was elsewhere. But the point is that this assert is now tripping when we drop in the player, because the player has an entity reference to... My dog just scared the crap out of me. Mighty, can you not do that? Every time somebody has to knock on the door to leave a package, he's got to announce it to the whole world. Thanks, man. Thanks. So anyway, yeah. So when the hero spawns in, right, he has that reference to a sword entity on his own entity, and that sword's position is not valid, right? It's pointing to the null position, or the notion of the null position, which is just like the int32 max or something like that, right? This world chunk uninitialized value basically means this position is bad, and so we don't want to... What did I just do? Didn't mean to do that. That position is bad, so we want to assert on that. Mighty, please stop talking. Stop huffing. No one cares. So yeah, that's what's going on. We're in a good spot now because Casey's probably going to diagnose that really quickly, and then we'll just jump into what is actually the topic for today. Adding support for non-spatial entities. So we'll probably debug that real quick, get it working the way it should, and then move on to just continuing to round this system out, you know, with the simulation region stuff, and it'll be good. You know, we'll keep pushing forward towards the place where I'm most excited to get to, as far as you know, probably the next like 50 to 100 days goes, which is all the rendering stuff, because that's more along the lines of what I want to learn how to implement. But and I've said it many times now on stream, you know, it's been really good to go back through this entity stuff, because I really feel like the information that Casey is trying to get across, and by demonstrating how to make all this take shape, it's definitely stuck a lot more. And even though there's still some nuance here that I'm not fully like integrating with my understanding of how the whole system is working together, I think some of that is just going to be cemented further as I do things like, again, use an Odin map to store the entity hash rather than this, what is it, in here, entity hash. Rather than using this, right, we can just use a map, and then we don't have to do this stuff, which kind of confuses things in my head. We should be able to just use the storage index as the key to that entity. And then somewhere along the line, somewhere down the line, I'm going to have to do a better job of appreciating the significance of this, because I don't know. I think it has to do with this and the recursion that's going on, right? Because we have this add entity call, and then in load entity reference, we also add an entity. And here's another thing too, like there's this thing which we can move into being a regular union, but we might even be able to get rid of that too. So I'm just not totally sure. We're going to have to wait and see how things take shape. There's also all these other things that I want to do with the code regarding like logging and using a tracking allocator to just kind of verify that we're using the allocators that we're building with the virtual arena, kind of using something along the lines of Casey's approach. I want to verify that that's all working correctly, but I want to wait until either I can't stand to not have that implemented, or until Casey starts doing some of these things himself, because I know he's going to get to that point where he starts implementing more debugging tooling on his own, and I'll probably figure out the best way to apply that using just what Odin gives me for free, and we'll cross that bridge when we get there. But there's lots of little things now. They just keep piling up, things to explore with respect to doing things more of like in an idiomatic Odin fashion. But as I always say, we'll get there when we get there. We just have to keep moving along here, and maybe at some point I'll just take a bit of a hiatus from following the series exactly, and we can just experiment on stream, and I can kind of get feedback from folks about the way I'm doing things, and just take a more deliberate, slow approach to kind of mastering the concepts that we want to retain. They're not necessarily game code specific, but are more of like applying the benefits that Odin gives us. I don't know. There's too much, and there's too much to do, too much to learn, not enough time in the day. But for now, we'll just keep going along this path here, and we'll see where it leads. So here we go.
There we go. It is time, ladies and gentlemen, it is time for day 66 of Handmade Hero. Welcome and thank you for joining me this morning. It is a beautiful morning here in sunny Seattle, Washington. I don't know why it's sunny. We have a reputation for rain, but it's been very sunny this summer. I don't know. Global warming. Who knows? I don't really know. Not a climatologist, but what I will say is it is sunny here, and I've had to block out the light. There's still some leaking in the back here. You would just see me in a giant halo of light today. Anyway, thank you for joining me for Handmade Hero. This, of course, is the show where we code a complete game live on Twitch, from scratch, no engine, no libraries. And again, it's really been a pleasure doing it. It's something I like to do. It's the way I like to code things, because I don't know. Maybe I'm a control freak. It's partially the reason I like to have sort of that entire thing, no engine and no library. I like to kind of go in there and know how every little part works. But I think it's also it's a great knowledge base, really, to go through and do all this sorts of thing. I think every programmer should do it once, get that sort of understanding of the complete pipeline, and really just be able to sort of know how everything works, even if you do end up deciding to use engines, use libraries, because there are good stuff out there for that. It just kind of makes you so much more well-rounded, so much more able to deal with stuff, and I don't know. It's a great feeling knowing you know how to do everything, even if you then choose not to. You can make better decisions, and you can also be more powerful in terms of dealing with problems in the stuff that you do use. And heaven knows there's problems in most of the stuff we use these days. It's true.
That's what's been so nice about using Odin, though, and that's exactly he's just kind of talking about something that I was trying to drive at a moment ago, which is that it's great that Odin can do all of this stuff for us. Like, the whole tracking allocator thing is so it seems so intuitive to me, and I don't know how Casey, or if he even tries to implement something along those lines, but basically what I'm talking about, and it's right here in the Odin overview, and I've actually seen example code that in the wild that just uses this example code from the overview. And let me see if it's right here. Tracking allocator. If you just copy this and then drop it into your code, you can see where all the allocations you haven't freed when your program finishes are. The tracking allocator will will show that for you, and then it'll show you where you've made bad freeze as well. And I want to get more comfortable using more of these nice features that Odin has, but there's like a good inflection point where it makes sense to drop that in. And right now we're not really having a problem like this, especially because Casey doesn't really do a whole lot of freeing of anything anyways, but it'll be good to have that extra bit of information and security that we know what we're doing things right. And so yeah, like being able to seeing how he would handle building a system like that in Scratch. The other thing is logging, but we'll get to that. But seeing how he would do some of these things from scratch, and then knowing how to think about them, and then looking how Odin does it, and then just relating those two together, I think is a really powerful learning combination. So that's what's just been really great about this series for me. It's like a great little meditative time in my day where I get to really just focus on my own little island of sanity, where I'm not overwhelmed by things that are outside of my control. This is totally within my control, right? I get to control what I'm learning, how I'm learning it, and it does a lot for making me come into other situations that I don't have control over necessarily, other than how I react to them and just what I personally do. When somebody else outside of my team or whatever at work, or something happens with the startup where it's just things that, they're not in your control. And it's important to learn, okay, I can't do anything about these inefficiencies and these, what I perceive to be poor processes that I can't do anything about. Those are totally outside of my prerogative to control. So what can I do? Well, I can be just better at what I do in all respects. And that's really what this series feels like it's doing for me. I can tell that, like, I don't do the same kind of programming that I'm doing for Odinmade Hero or that Casey does for Handmade Hero at my day job, but there are little things I have carried over when I start thinking about writing whole new code, and it's been pretty rewarding just to see that little bit of a feedback loop going. I think it'll just keep paying more and more dividends as time goes on.
Software is complicated. So let's get started. We're on day 66 today, so if you have pre-ordered the game on handmadehero.org, you will want to unzip day 65 source code. That's something you can download, obviously. Unzip day 65 source code, and you'll be exactly where I am today. So if you'd like to follow along at home with the code, that is how you would do it. Let's go ahead and open up the aforementioned Handmade Hero. I believe that we had just finished up updating our code to use simulation regions, which was kind of a cool thing. I think I liked, whoa, oops, don't accidentally hit that button. I think I told Windows I wanted help. Don't want to see what that's going to do. So what we had done is we'd finished updating our code to use simulation regions, but we hadn't actually gotten a chance to go through and actually debug it all, and there's a couple features we needed to add to it still in order to make it be complete and do all the things that we needed. And so today we just kind of need to go through, make sure that everything's cleaned out and working properly with our new code, and we need to add one or two small things to it to make sure that it does everything that we need. So what we have here, if I remember correctly, is we have a simulation region which does not currently have the option of allowing entities to not essentially exist at a location. In other words, there was already concept sort of in our game. We had only just started toying around with it, but there was already a concept that you could have something like a sword that the hero was carrying or could use, and that sword wasn't anywhere in the world in particular until they chose to use it or swing it, right? And again, this is not a fully fleshed out concept yet. It was just something we were playing around with, but it seemed very potentially useful to be able to have entities that don't have a specific position in the world so that they can come into being and out of being as far as rendering and stuff is concerned. That seems very useful, and we could do a lot with that. So in our simulation region, what we would like to do is support that operation. And so what we kind of want to do is have some sort of a flag or some kind of something where when we load something into the simulation region to update it, we can smoothly handle the fact that it doesn't actually exist spatially. It only exists logically. And then when we restream it out, we will keep that information. So basically on the in and out, keep track of it. And then on any of the updates, what we do in the sim region, understand that it's not actually participating spatially in our simulation. So how do we do that, right? And that's a good question. Since it's a concept we haven't really done much with, it's kind of, we don't really know much about the requirements of it. But what I would say is we do already have this collides concept here. And so what I think is I do wonder if maybe now's a good time to just kind of introduce the concept of having flags on our entity. Now we've seen flags before already. They're kind of a good catch-all for just a simple small piece of storage that allow us to tag our entities with special conditions that we want them to have. And so, excuse me. And so it seems to me that since this is kind of a special concept that we want to make sure we can always check about or check for, it seems like it would be a nice thing to put in those flags, right? It seems like it'd be a nice thing to be able to mark entities specifically as being spatially non-existent so that we can specially check for that in code and not have to do something where like the position is set to a large value and that's the only clue, right? So I think what I might do is go ahead and just do that. I'm going to just make a little enum here to kind of hold our flags. And again, there's no particular reason to make an enum. It's kind of just a habitual thing that I do just to group things together, where I'll put them in an enum. We could alternatively just make a series of pound defines, or if you're a person who likes const values, you could do them that way. Basically, all we need to do is define a bunch of flags that basically say what the properties of entities are that we want stored in these flags, right? So I'll go ahead and say underneath the entity type, we're just going to have a flags field, right? And then we're going to get rid of this collides, and I'm going to say entity flag underscore collides, right? So I'll do it this way. So there's different ways you can write these flag fields, and I usually write them a different way. I usually write flag fields like this, where I do like, that, and then as I go down, I do 2, 4, 8, right? Because what we want to do for flags is we want to have a bit field, right, where each bit of a value represents a different Boolean condition. But lately, I've been wondering why I do that. I've been wondering why I don't just do it this way, because this seems like a lot easier to read, where you just kind of do like that, right? Where you just shift 1 up by an increasing decimal value, because it's just a lot easier to read than this. So I'm going to try doing it this way because I feel like I've just been doing it wrong. I mean, not wrong. There's no wrong way to do it as long as I come up with the right values, but I feel like this is maybe just easier. So lately in my own code as well, I've been thinking I should probably just write it like this. Now, ideally what we have is a thing that makes it so that this just happened for you automatically. And I believe that John Blow's language already has this feature. But unfortunately, we don't have John Blow's language yet. Someday. All right. So we have collides, and then maybe we have a thing that's like non-spatial or something like that, where an entity can sort of just be tagged as non-spatial, and then at that point, we know that that entity is not going to participate in any spatial operations, and the p-value for it is essentially meaningless, right? You might want to arrange some of these things a little bit differently here as well, like so. We have some cleanup to do here in here as well. We haven't really dealt with z's yet, so that might be something to do in the relatively near future as well, because we haven't really thought about that much, and it would be nice to get that under control as well as one thing we do before we go much further with our entity stuff. Maybe put in some stairs where you go up and down, and just think about how you want to handle that and get that going. So anyway, if I have these here, what I can do now to kick off this change is just compile the program and see where collides was happening, and then decide how I want to handle like these positions, right? And so there's
So the way I've set this up is not going to work quite the way that Casey's is set up. I mean, he just makes the flags field a U32, but the enum itself, right, is just basically different bits being set on that U32, right? So I think this is a good use case for Odin's bit sets, and I've seen these used elsewhere enough times that I feel like I should be able to figure it out. But and what's weird is that he decided to start doing this instead of, I feel like I'm on the wrong day or something almost. Because no, that's right. We're doing this because we need to be able to check to see if the non-spatial flag is on the entity, in this case the sword, and then that way we'll avoid tripping that assert. So I'm gonna look over in the docs here in the overview, and then just see if by looking at bit sets, if I can just kind of, so basically we would say that we have an enum of entity flag, an entity flag enum, and it'll have, whatever the number of flags is that we care about, I think. And then we would say that that's a bit set, right? Maybe that's wrong. Maybe the way I'm conceptualizing this is incorrect, but I feel like that's right. And so we'll just go for it. So we have our SimEntity flag enum, and then we have SimEntity flags, and we say that's a bit set. Oops. And does it just look like this? I think the syntax actually is like, expected an enum type, whoops, a SimEntity flag. So that should be fine. And then here, I think we're good. So if we try and build and run this, there's no collides member anymore, right? Because now we just have the flags. And, well, I guess we'll just go, Because it's not going to look the same for us as it does for Casey, right? So I'm going to have to go into the main game code. We'll jump down over here, and we'll see if entity collides. It should be if entity... How do I want to do this? So it's going to be on the flags that we want to check, and I think we want to just say... I think we can just say if collides in entity flags. Let's go back here. I thought that you could just do that. Did I not save that? Undeclared name collides. Maybe my understanding of... Yeah, I feel like I've got the right idea here. I'm just doing it wrong. Because if I look right here, set membership, A contains element E, right? That seems to imply to me that we could ask, hey, if the collides flag is in that list of flags, or if the collides flag is in that list of flags, then I mean this. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe I was thinking about that incorrectly. And I feel like I had to do something similar, actually. Let's go back to the code here. I feel like I had to do something similar inside of the platform layer. But, yeah, it was like in the handling of events. Yeah, right here. So this key modifier bit set here, right? It says we've got these key mod flags, like left shift, left control, right control, etc. And you should be able to just say, hey, if this flag is in this bit set, then, you know, do whatever. And I had to do this a little bit differently because I had to actually compare bit sets that are just defined as constants in here to see what key modifiers that key press event had on it. And so it wasn't like it had a list of flags or like one flag on the event, because it could be multiple together. And so that's why I had to do that like that. But I tried doing a similar thing at this point where I was asking, hey, is this flag in this bit set? And once again, I'm trying it now and it's not working. That's that doesn't feel good, but why? Why is that? Is it like that? Is that all I was missing? That could be all I was missing. You know what? And I think a similar thing happened to me somewhere else, but I can't Yeah, I mean, like right here, right? Because these are all enums too, I think. Yeah, I just wasn't accessing the name right. Whoops. Okay, well, I'm glad I figured that out sooner rather than later. That would have been sad. So same thing. Now we check to see if the collides flag is in the test entities flags. I think I said that right. And we just do that everywhere. Everywhere we're assigning it to, we want to say, hey, well, this is going to probably look different for these other, like the assignments, because we want to mark that the sword is non-spatial, right? So like in this case, instead of just saying that collides is in there, we'll say that the sword also starts out non-spatial. I think that's pretty much exactly what Casey's going to do, so I'll just go ahead and do that here. And it doesn't collide, actually, right? Because we were setting it to collides equals false before. And then everywhere else, I think flags is just going to be, just going to have collides. Although some of them may start out non-spatial. I'm not sure. And do the same thing for the wall. That might be it. Okay. Looks like we're good.
I think that might just be an easier way to do it. So I can just say, you know, is, or maybe just even is set entity, and then I pass that flag value that I want, right? That seems relatively straightforward to me, so I think that's what I'm going to start with. And that's just an easy way of making it so that it's clear what's going on, and it's just, you know, it's a really simple function. The function is just taking one of these sim entities, like so, and then a flag value, like that. I can make it so that this is kind of an annoying part, right? In C, one of the things that's kind of annoying is what I'd like to be able to do is say, I want to take flag value here, but it has to be it has to be some combination of sim entity flags. That would give me a little extra type check or something like that. Unfortunately, you can't really do stuff like that in C. I can understand why. It's a little bit of a hard problem. But so as a result, I'm just going to take a uint32 there. The reason I don't take a sim entity flags value there is because you wouldn't be able to OR these together. Like if I wanted to use a single isSet call to check for these two things together, that obviously isn't going to be passable to a sim entity flag taking argument, because as soon as you OR it together, it becomes an integer value. And so that's why I'm using that uint32 flag there, right?
So, you know, granted, I was dumb and forgot that I need to use this dot syntax to be able to specify the name of the flag I'm setting, but I really didn't have to think about any of that because bit sets just kind of do the thing that I want to do, right? If this flag that I care about at this point in the code is in my entities flags, then go do the thing, and I don't have to write a special function, you know, like the isSet function that Casey is writing. I just do this. I use this feature of Odin, and it really is pretty nice.
Anyway, so this is very simple. This is just saying we know we have the entity. We've got that flags field. So I'm just going to do a binary AND with whatever the value is, whichever one of those values you've passed in, and that's going to give me a value that would be 0 or 1, well, 0 or the flag value, right, after it was done. So then I'm going to return that value back, and that will be fine for anything that people need to if on, because as long as it's a 0, non-zero, that's all that's necessary in C. You don't have to have it be exactly 0 or 1.
And then like some of the other stuff here, right, all of these other operations I can use with the bit set. I could check to see if, like, let's say I have, I suppose, well, the whole list of flags, and I want to check to see if multiple flags, not just one, right, are I want to see if an entity is both has collides and non-spatial in the entity flags. I don't have to like do if E is in A, right? I don't have to do if collides in entity flags and if non-spatial. I can just, I'm pretty sure I'd be able to just write it. I can just do it in the code. I think I could just write it like this, non-spatial collides, and then using, what was that? If it's a subset, A is a subset of B or equal to B. It's a little bit different with proper subset, I think that's basically saying B might have elements that are not in A. But we would just do something like, because this won't work, right? It's giving us a syntax error here. But if we do something like this, right? Or maybe not. That does not work quite like I thought it would. But I'm sure it would be something along those lines. I don't think it would be that hard to do. But we don't need to do that yet, so I'm not going to spend time trying to figure out how to do it yet.
So that'd be the set call. And that's totally trivial. So I'll go ahead and stash that. In fact, we have an entity.h file. I don't know if that maybe is more appropriate to put in here. We haven't really done much with entities yet, so it's hard to say. But let's go ahead and do that. So now let's see. Do we have entity.cpp? That should probably go, I guess, in here. Let's see here. There we go. And so we'll do this as well. This collisions, that's the same thing. This is test entity, and this is entity flag collides. So we got to see if both of the entities collide. Let's see, for stuff like this, when we add a wall, we will want to add in that flag. We could actually do an add flag here, something like that, where we set, instead of doing the set manually, we go through a setting call. Again, don't really know if that's necessary, but I find this is more of a notational thing. This is not really necessarily a programming thing. I'm not anticipating us doing complicated things in here. This is not me like guessing about what's going to happen in the code later on and saying I think we want control over how these are set and read. I would be fine running the code by hand in there easily. It's not really a big deal. But the reason that I kind of want to have an add flag and is set and that sort of thing for these guys is more for readability. I just kind of like having that readability. So if I want to say like add flag, it's just easier for me to see that that's what's going on, right? So if I do an add flag here, I could go ahead and do the exact same format for the call. You pass what flag you're trying to do, and then it just takes that entity flags and it orders in the flag that you give it, right? And so our entity flag collides is there, and we're all good, right? So that's about it. Let's just finish, because we've got that same thing that we want to be able to do here, right? We want to be able to add that. Oops, that was wrong. Collides equals false, we don't have to do anything for it because we're assuming the flags start at 0, so we only have to turn them on. There we go. This one's going to be one that collides, entity flag collides, like so. And again, another one. That's our monstar. Let's see, entity flag collides, like so. And the familiar also collides. Entity.lowSim, entity flag collides. All right. So that should be about it. And now we just need to deal with the sword, again, which is non-spatial. So since the sword is non-spatial, we will say add flag, entity lowSim, flag, entity flag non-spatial. So now we know that the sword is a non-spatial entity that's not actually anywhere in the world at the moment. So given that that's the fact, that's the case, I suppose, you know what, we actually probably don't quite need to do that either now that I think about it, because technically I think we know when things are spatial and non-spatial at the moment. The way that that's actually working is when we do a change entity location for things, we're actually, that whether or not that p value happens to be valid, we kind of already know this, right? I don't know if you remember, but the way this was working is we have that null position for the p's and non. So what we could do pretty easily is in here just say that the way that this works is the low entities sim, when we change this position, the low entities sim will set it to non-spatial or spatial, right? So we basically have whether there's a new p or not. If there isn't a new position, we'll just, we'll add that non-spatial flag. And if there is a new position, we'll clear the flag. And so at that point, we kind of just have this easy way of making sure that that flag is always set based on that value, right? And that seems pretty straightforward to me. Now, we almost...
Okay, so I do have to think a little bit about this. It irritates me that this didn't just work so clearly. I'm doing something stupid again. Expected an operand. Like, that should just do what I think it should do, is how I feel about this. I feel like I'm right, and the compiler is wrong. But reality has a way of you know, crashing down on you sometimes. So I cannot use an if statement in the file scope. This is creating all sorts of weirdness trying to do this. And the reason why it matters is because of what Casey just did inside of the world code, where if we're going to set the entity's position in the world to be non-existent, essentially, we also have to set its flags. We have to add this flag, but the problem is we need to add it without overriding its current flags. And I'm not sure how to do that in Odin yet. But the point is that we can't just do this, right? Because there might be some other important flags on the entity that we don't want to get rid of. So I wonder, let's see. Yeah, here we go. So this seems easy enough. We can just do minus equals non-spatial. And so that'll give us, the result that'll be stored in flags then will be all the flags that it already has minus non-spatial. Actually, we wanted to add it here, so we're gonna plus, and this does the inverse. But we did want to subtract the non-spatial flag out in the case where we are setting it to a valid position inside of the world, right? So I think that just works, but I don't understand if that just works. How come you don't work? Is it because I need to like specify what the type of this bit set is? Well, I wonder if just the order is wrong. That seems weird though. What? Really? So that just works. So what we just did is we said, hey, or what is that evaluating to? If it'll evaluate to true if A is a subset of B or equal to B. Which I guess that makes more sense now that I'm looking at it. I just had the that's how we would want to check that, right? If we have these entity flags and we want to see if it's either identical to this bit set or it at least contains these, right? Whereas this would be saying flags has these. Oh man. Well, I'm going to have to think about how some of these operations are doing, what they're doing. It's just been a while since I've thought about sets and the union or inequality of them. But I need to clearly get a very intuitive sense for that if I want to use this feature and not cause problems for myself. For now, it's probably sufficient to just, do this, right? Because this definitely does what we needed to do for now. But once we start worrying about groups of flags, then I have to really have that down. But at that point, Casey would explain exactly what we're trying to do, and I'd be able to test specifically what it is, I'm trying to do versus my understanding, or test my understanding of it and how it works with Odin's bit sets, right? Like, it's just not something that's stopping us from moving forward right now, but maybe I'll take some time off stream and we can talk about it tomorrow, because I don't want to wade too far off in just getting things wrong, half a dozen times before the idea actually clicks in my head. So we'll just keep moving forward for now.
Don't even need that because the low entity stores it already, but and so I guess to some degree we could even have this flag only be set at load time. But for now, I guess I'll leave it that way. When we go and do a little bit more with streaming entities in and out, we could do some more with that. All right, let's take a look at how this is going to work in our stream in and out. Let's take clear flag in here. And so clear flag is just going to do the exact same thing. Clear flag will basically end with not the flag, which means it passes all other flags through except that flag. Pretty straightforward again, it just gets rid of it. So if you want to remove a flag, you can do that. So that should be about it. Now, when we're actually in the sim region, we can go ahead and start handling these. Let's see what we got here. So obviously for move entity, I think we want to say, yeah, with move entity, we probably want to make sure that no one's trying to move an entity that has a non-spatial flag set, because that wouldn't make any sense. So probably what I would want to do here is assert, just for now, that whatever this entity is, it doesn't have the non-spatial flag set, because if it did, it wouldn't make very much sense. And similarly, we should probably assume that collides is authoritative here, but what we could also do is we could say that we want to make sure that both of these things are set, right? That we want these we want. So yeah, this is kind of interesting. What we could do here is say we want entity flag collides and non-spatial to not be set, right? So we want is set and not is set, if that makes sense. Entity flag non-spatial, right? We could say that. And again, like, I don't really know, that's on both of these guys, right? I don't really know if that should be necessary. We could just assert that because maybe collides should never be set on something that's non-spatial, but I don't know. So it's just something to think about when we're testing entities. I'll leave it like that for now. There's also a question of whether we want to have our own sort of collapsing for that, because the test for something and not something else in flag language could be boiled down more simply, but we could also just assume that the compiler is smart enough to do that for us, or that we just don't care.
Okay, so it's not quite the same thing, because before, what I was trying to test is, like, if both the collides and the non-spatial flag are in the entity flags, then, you know, go ahead and execute that code. So it's going to have to look like if collides is in the entity flags and non-spatial isn't, right? We're going to have to write the test that way. So it's not quite the right opportunity to learn what I was just talking about a moment ago with checking, you know, set unions and subsets of sets and things like that. But it is still good to keep finding more uses for it, I guess. Just so I can get really comfortable using these bit sets. So I guess all we would do here is just say and not non-spatial in entity flags. I don't know if there's a way to do that using those operators. Doesn't want me to write this that way. It wants parentheses around that. So yeah, same thing over here. All right, we only want to do the collision detection if both of these things are true. But looking at the docs here, I do wonder if there would be a more elegant way using these bit set operators to do that check. So instead of doing this, right, if E and A, because what if we had multiple flags that we cared about, right? Oops. If we had multiple flags that we cared about not being set, you know, this would be very verbose to check if non-spatial and this other flag were not in entity flags. You'd have to use this in syntax 4 different times in one check. So maybe I'll play around with that after the stream and see what that's supposed to look like.
We can think about that. But yeah. So let's see here. What else we got? We want to be able to, in our begin sim, check to see if we've got that situation going where things are non-spatial, right? So when we add entities in, obviously when we load something, when we do our is in rectangle check, we're going to have a situation where for any entity that we were looking at, if we have the low entity itself, we don't really need, if it's non-spatial, we don't really need to do a rectangle check on it because it can never be inside the rectangle if it's non-spatial, right? So if the entity flag non-spatial is set on this guy, then we don't need to check, right? So if we only want to do things that don't have non-spatial set. If non-spatial isn't set, then we would go ahead and pull him in this way. When we're in our add entity call, that's where it'll get pulled in, which is kind of a separate issue. But let's
go ahead and catch up in there. So on the adding an entity to the region, we check that flag to see if that entity that we're about to add is non-spatial, in which case we wouldn't. And this might solve the bug that we wanted to solve at the beginning of the stream that we were left with on Friday. Or if it doesn't, it gets us that much closer. So if the non-spatial flag is in the low sim flags, or rather if it's not set, right? So we want to not that. We go down here and wrap this code in that check. It's almost like it should be spatial, you know? I almost feel like that's what that flag should actually be. And then, you know, you would know it's not spatial otherwise, but it's more of like the non-spatial spatial case is the special case, if that makes sense. So it's just kind of weird to think about.
go ahead and do the nsim first as well. So when we're in the nsim, we have our stored entity reference, which we've written back. What we want to do now is when we do our map into chunk space, we don't want to do a map into chunk space for any entity that isn't going to be spatial, right? We want to just set him to the null position when we map him out if he's not spatial. So what we can do there is we can say, again, if it's set, the entity that we're dealing with, we can say if that entity has the entity flag non-spatial, if it has that set, then instead of setting it to whatever the chunk space position of that entity is, we'll just set it to the null position, right? Like so. So that way on stream in, we don't check if it's not supposed to be spatial, and if we, and when we're streaming out, we write it back correctly based on that value, right? So that's one way to do it. Seems reasonable for now. I don't know. We'll take a look at it in more detail as we start to use it more.
All right, let me back that up. So he's saying here, when we get that new P created, we just zero it out for now. Or you could just set it to the null position at first, right? And then if this isn't set, then you would do the map in a chunk space thing. I don't really know. This makes it a little bit more explicit, I guess, so we'll just say that. Kind of seems like this code should already do that. But maybe you wouldn't care because you wouldn't be calling this code regularly anyways. It's only when we're doing this begin and end sim stuff, so you wouldn't bake it into that. Yeah, and then we just move that in there. Then I think that's good. He's using a ternary operator, but I don't know that I really need to do that. So I think we're good.
So the only thing that we need to do now is take a look at add entity, because add entity will still add entities by pulling them in if they're referenced by some other entity, right? So load entity reference will pull in new entities, even if they're non-spatial. Like if the guy is holding the sword, it'll pull in the sword and that sort of stuff. So when we do that, and we do that add entity call, right? That add entity call does stuff like figuring out where things should live in the world. Excuse me. And so I just want to verify that we do something logical in that particular circumstance, right? So when we're doing add entity, when we add the entity and we pass it, so there's I believe there's multiple ways of doing that call. There's the add entity that takes a location, and there's an add entity call that does not take a location, right? And the get sim space p is something that happens when we don't pass that pointer there, right? And so I think let's take a look here. I think load entity reference technically is doing it wrong at the moment. I think this is just a bug that we just never really encountered because we haven't done anything with the sim regions yet. But if you take a look at load entity reference, you can see that it's actually calling this version of add entity, which is one that does not actually take a position. And I think that that's wrong. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to like label that as a call that nobody should actually be doing. Oops, I hit my numlock key. Don't know why I did that. So I'm going to label that as add entity raw, and basically I don't want anyone to call that call, I don't think. I think what we want them to do is we want them to call this always, so that it actually people get a position properly when they need it. And so we'll just have this guy call into that function where it'll pass a 0, right? Yeah, what that's going to call that raw. There we go. And that.
All right, so that's a little bit different because I'm pretty sure our add entity code. Yeah, I've just got it like ID'd here rather than having that raw suffix. So like you said, this implementation will call the raw function, or procedure, I should say. And then we'll just do that. We'll get rid of the procedure group. And then we'll just say that's the proper add entity call. Actually, no, that's the add entity raw call. Mess that up. There we go. So now that looks good, and I think that, I don't know where he passed that nil in, but maybe I'll see simp of type 2 float wide array is missing a procedure call at line 129. So right here is where we would pass in nil, I'm pretty sure. And we're hitting a different assertion. I wonder what that's about. And so I think this is just catching, I mean, this assert is doing exactly what it's supposed to do. Oh wait, is this wrong? I think this was supposed to be non-spatial. Or no. I can't remember what this assert was supposed to be. Let me see here. We were inside of the move entity code right around here. Yeah, that was supposed to be non-spatial. And that makes sense because why would we be calling move entity on a non-spatial entity? Go ahead and get caught back up to where I was. Looks like the game's running again. And so yeah, when we drop in the player, I think the move entity call is being made on the sword, and that's what's tripping that right there. So now I think we're good. Where was I? Around here.
And that way, it'll always call this get sim space p, and then all we have to do is for get sim space p now, what we can do is say, well, all right, the v2 for the position of this entity, what we're going to do is we're going to initialize that to something, and then only in the case where we know that this entity is something that is legitimately supposed to be spatial. So basically, again, we just use that not is set, entity flag, non-spatial. So assuming that it's not a non-spatial entity, then we will go ahead and actually figure out where it is in the world. Otherwise, we will set its position to something totally random. Now, what we could do, again, is set this to some weird value, right? Like so that we know that it's not involved. We could also, in debug mode, set it to something weird, like a signaling NaN value. I don't know if we want to do that, but we could put it to do here. Do we want to set this to signaling NaN to make sure, NaN in debug mode to make sure nobody ever uses the position of a non-spatial entity? And I don't know the answer to that question. There are floating point values you can set that will cause the FPU to cause a hard exception anytime you touch them. And that might be something we want to stick in here in developer mode, when we're not in release mode, so that if anyone ever tries to use a position value that would break this situation, for a non-spatial entity, it would tell us right away. That might be interesting. We could do something like that. All right. So anyway, we cannot.
All right. Before he moves on, I wanted to catch up with this check he's adding. So before doing this, and before we do the check, like you said, we're going to just splat this out to be 100,000. I guess I didn't fully hear why he said that. Well, I think it's because this is always going to be outside of the bounds of where the simulated space is going to be. And we could also just make, we could also do this, I think. And that way I don't even have to do that. And then we just have to implement the check. So by default, it'll be basically in a place where you wouldn't see it anyways. But at the end of the day, we never want a non-spatial entity to be passed in here. I think. Because that is, you know, if somebody is passing it in an entity that shouldn't be on the camera, or shouldn't be shown, if we're going to do that, then something bad has happened. We should never be in that position where we're trying to use a non-spatial entity's camera space position. Okay, so flags like that. Move that over. And then I think that's good.
Convert the argument because I did not pass the pointer as I was supposed to. So that should handle that situation, right? Now, I don't know, again, where we're at. I just know that that was one of the things that we needed to do, so I went ahead and did it. But we have other things probably that we want to be able to do. So let's go ahead and start debugging this and see where we're at. So in update sword, this is interesting. So for update sword, we never handled this as well. And we've got this need to make, yeah, so we actually kind of knew that we hadn't finished this yet. I guess it looks like I've even put an assertion in there. So let's go ahead and finish porting the update sword routine to correctly be non-spatial. And that should be pretty easy to do now that we actually have it, because before we didn't have it. So when we update sword, I think there's probably nothing really that we need to do if it's in its non-spatial state. So basically, if that non-spatial, maybe there will be in the future, but for now, if that entity flag non-spatial is set, we don't actually need to do anything. So all we need to do is when it is actually set, and once it travels the total distance that the sword traveled, I don't know why we don't have it to do here, but we should need to handle the fact that distance traveled might not have enough distance for the total entity move for the frame. We'll deal with that a little bit later on. So anyway, yeah, inside our...
As ever, it is hard to keep up with that 1.5 times speed. But it moves things along more quickly, so I save time. So I really feel like I can't not have him playing back this fast. So we need to handle the fact that the distance traveled might not have enough distance for the total entity move for the frame. It already feels like this code was written so long ago that I don't understand the consequences of, like, why is it important that the distance traveled has enough space, has enough distance for the total entity move for the frame? I guess it's because of the iterations we're doing there in the move entity call. I don't know. So we do nothing here. Otherwise, do all of this. Is that really? I think that's pretty much it.
Update sword call, assuming that the entity actually is spatial, then we'll do the thing where we move the sword. And when it gets to the end, what we want to do here is now make the entity not exist anymore. So we can just have a make entity non-spatial or something like this, some kind of call where we just say make entity non-spatial, and we pass that entity, and that will sort of delete it from the spatialness of the world, right? And that'd be, I don't know why these are all inline at the moment. I guess probably because we're doing them inside a switch kind of a situation, so maybe that does make some sense. But basically, make entity non-spatial is a really trivial routine. All that's going to do is set that flag. I don't think we really need to do anything else at the moment. We could update the simspace p to be the valid location. In fact, I could do something where we have a pound defined for this. You know what I'm saying? Like something where essentially in this entity.h, we say pound define invalid p or something like that, and we just can make that be whatever the value is that we're going to do. So we have our invalid p here, and we can set our invalid p here as well. So we do make entity non-spatial, we'll set its p equal to that, and it will set the flag on the entity that's, excuse me, that says that it's non-spatial. So entity flag non-spatial comes in, there we go, and that's about it. That's all that should really have to do. And
okay, so here, yeah, we're just going to modify this pointer and say that on the entity flags, we want to add non-spatial. And then we're going to set that entity's camera relative position to be invalid P, and I guess that should just be that, right? I guess if it was going to be more explicit, we'd be saying this is the invalid camera space position, because we already have like an invalid world position essentially, but it's just, you know, a different context. I guess this needs to be wrapped in brackets. There you go. To add that flag. And then back in that get, yeah, should non-spatial be one word or two words? Casey's mixing it up. This kind of looks weird. Now that I'm looking at it, I feel like I do want that to be two words. I don't know. It looks weird no matter which way I do it. I could say not spatial, or we could just do the inverse, like I was talking about earlier. I don't know. Now it's all weird. No matter what I do, it feels weird. Okay, we'll just leave it like that for now. So I guess I missed him defining that invalid P. Yeah, and that's going to be... We put that in the header, but we don't have a header, so we can just put it up here. We have no other constants in here, somehow. So there we go. It's one too many zeros. And now I think we're good. What is this? What is this? That's in the wrong file. Where am I looking? I'm looking in the sim region code. Oh, yeah, that has to be not declared. And now we might actually be good. Well, nope. That was weird. It was like it allowed me to drop in the hero, but then, yeah, no, we're still hitting an assert. It's not the same assert though. That's weird. It kind of just looks like it's the good old-fashioned, yeah, invalid position assert. So that's messed up. I wonder why that's happening.
Can make that be whatever the value is that we're going to do. So we have our invalid P here, and we can set our invalid P here as well. So we do make entity non-spatial, we'll set its P equal to that, and it will set the flag on the entity. That's right,
I forgot to change that. Where was that? Was that in, that was an entity? Where else were we setting that? We gotta set it here, but I thought we were doing that elsewhere as well. Yeah. Inside of the sim code in get camera. No, sim space position. Ah, yeah. So this, I think, well, can't I just do this, right? I don't even have to say what the type is because it'll just know. Okay, I think that's fine. We're still crashing, but all I can do is hope that Casey has the same problem right now.
Excuse me. That says that it's not spatial. So entity flag non-spatial comes in. There we go. And that's about it. That's all that should really have to do. And then we similarly have the inverse thing, which would be make entity spatial, right? And to make the entity spatial on a sim entity, what you would need to do is pass in a position that's where you actually want it to be. And what that would do is exactly the opposite, right? It would clear that non-spatial flag, and then it would set the entity's position to the position that you asked for, right? And similarly, I guess we could say that it would set the velocity of the entity probably to 0 to clear that out as well. Or maybe you pass one in. We could say that you pass in whatever its starting velocity should be, something like that. Either way, seems pretty straightforward. So let's just go ahead and assume that we've got those guys and that they're hanging out. All right.
Okay. We are burning through this now. So we want to say that we have a new P position. But did he call that a new P? I guess it doesn't really matter. Yeah, it's just a regular P, a plain old P, and then the delta as well is a V2. And here we want to remove that flag and then just set the P and the DP.
Velocity should be something like that. Either way, seems pretty straightforward. So let's just go ahead and assume that we've got those guys and that they're hanging out. All right, we can deal with that later. So that's what we want to do there. Let's see where we're at again. Just trying to figure out exactly what's going on with all of our stuff. So in our nsim, let's see here. In our nsim, what entity are we dealing with? We're dealing with the sword here. Let's go ahead and see why we're getting this assertion, because our sword shouldn't have had its location changed like that, or it should have had location changed, but it shouldn't be having an assertion problem, I don't think. So I don't actually know what this is complaining about. Flags equals this. Oh, I do sort of see, I guess, what it's complaining about here. Where is our stored value, P? Well, the stored, that's actually fine. The stored value, it's coming from an invalid chunk. It looks like, is that correct? Let's see. Stored P, it's coming from an invalid chunk, and it's staying in an invalid chunk. So what was the assertion? What was the problem there that it was complaining about? Assert not old P or is valid. So it was expecting us to pass null in both cases where the things were not going to be valid. So that's kind of interesting. I wonder if that's just a bad idea for how, because it makes this call kind of harder to use, if that makes sense. What we'd rather be able to do is pass the null position in here and have that actually be the way that that works. So I wonder if this is actually kind of just annoying and not really what we would want for the way that this call works, because basically it would make us do a bunch of busy work here. Like I'd have to go ahead and make sure I check to see exactly whether it was spatial and now it's not, and vice versa and stuff, and then pass nulls or not in each of these conditions. For the new P, that's not such a big deal, but again, for the old P, it would be. I'd have to go actually start looking at that, which isn't so good. And so I wonder if maybe we just want that code to kind of be a little more intelligent about how it works, and maybe change up sort of how we're thinking about these old Ps, old Ps and new Ps, if that makes sense. Furthermore, passing in the old P doesn't really make any sense anymore because the low entity itself actually has this information in it. So this is all kind of a little janky and kind of more about the old way we were doing things, and doesn't really necessarily reflect what we actually do now, if that makes sense. So I wonder if this is just kind of stupid and we shouldn't just take the opportunity to modernize this a little bit based on the fact that we now know that it can always work directly on correct values. That seems like a good idea, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. So I'm going to go ahead and say, let's get rid of this call entirely, this one right here, basically, and let's fold this up into here in some kind of nice way. So instead, we could just say, we have a low entity index, and we have whatever, maybe when you say change entity location, you always also have to pass the entity, not just the index, because it is going to update, it's going to update that call. So what we could do, yeah. Sorry, I'm just thinking this through. I'm thinking this through what the best way to do this is. So, all right, I'll start with this. Let's put it this way. I'll start with this. So what we'll do at first is we'll say, okay, we have the low entity. We're going to take a world position, and the world position for now, the new position will always be an actual position, and you'll just pass null position if you don't want it to set to a new position, right? Does that make sense? Because we have the null position, right? And so we can just do an is valid on something, and we don't need to pass pointers for that, right? So we can say is valid new P, and then we get this, right? So what I could do is make this work essentially that way, right? So we've got new P init like that. I guess I could actually do it this way. And then we'll just have this guy do old P, world position, new P, like so. These will both start out being nulls, which is what this routine wanted in the first place. And then what we'll do is we'll say if new P init is valid, right? If the new position that's pointing in that we're getting is valid, then we'll actually set new P equal to point to it. Otherwise, it will remain null. And for old P, what we'll do is we'll say if low entity, if that flag is not set. Oops, that's a sim there. Entity flag. Non-spatial. In the case where the low entity is not supposed to be spatial, it will leave it set to 0. But in the case where it is a spatial entity, then it will go ahead and grab that position out of the low entity and use it. So that would keep it working basically the same way it is now, but it will make it so that that we can call it in a more sensible fashion.
Whoa, that was a lot of change. So we asked to see if the non-spatial flag is set on the let's see, this is going to be, oh geez, low sim entities flags. If it is, actually we need to be asking if it's not set. And then when we do that, we say that the old position has a world position, and we want to go ahead and throw that in when we call this. That makes sense. We wouldn't do that if it was non-spatial. And then we also want to validate that the new p init param, which is what this will become, if that is in fact valid. Does that want a pointer, or I think this wants to be dereferenced, right? Or no, it's actually not even going to be a pointer anymore. That is going to be passed by value. And then we say that the new p equals the address of new p init. Well, that's not right. I think we actually want to do this, right? I think that's right. You just kind of wrote it wrong, is what it looks like to me. We'll see. I think everything else stays the same. So maybe that wasn't as much change as I thought it was.
Right? And so now when you change any location, you don't ever have to pass that. You just pass whatever the new p is going to be. And let's take a look here. So
okay, so he's got, oh, that's weird. That does not look like it should be the only error he's getting. But whatever. So if I just try and run this, we'll go ahead and see. So I think in the main game code, what was that, like 539 or something? Oh, shoot. Where was it? Was it 589? 510. Weren't we just here? This is not what I was thinking of. So maybe it was in the other place. This is the one that this is the case that he's about to look at. I think we can just do this and then that pointer being passed in. I don't know if he'll just dereference it, but that's what I'll do for now. And so that leaves the other spot. Yeah, that was in sim region. So that doesn't get passed in anymore, and then this can just be by value. So I don't think this will fix the bug, but maybe it will. Nope, now we don't even run, so that's great. Is this the culprit?
So when we add low entities in, the same thing would be true. Instead, now when we pass
Oh no, I closed Casey.
that p-value here, let's just go ahead and pass real p-values through for now. Let's take a look. We'll just pass null position in the cases here. And again, I think we probably want to clean this up one step further, but for now, this will be okay.
Okay, so he's just getting rid of the pointer on that, which is fine by me. So that means anybody who was calling that, which was a few places here, well, or was that? I'll just go through these one at a time. I guess this should just be null position. Maybe it should be that by default. So that's no longer by reference. That's no longer by reference. What else we got? Same there, and then this has to be the null position as well. So now maybe we'll be okay. That makes sense because I was dereferencing nil being passed in there. Well, clearly we have some other problem now, and I have no idea what it is. So that feels great. Yeah. Something is very broken at this point. Hopefully, hopefully Casey has a similar issue. I don't know.
Let's keep going.
I thought today would be a little bit easier, to be honest with you. I didn't think that today would be a struggle, and it's turning out to be one.
In here, and so on. All right. So let's see how that gets us. Let's just take a look. All right. Well, this is interesting.
Oh, thank God. I think he has hit something that the debugger told him was a problem, rather than, you know, ours just blowing up. What is that? What is happening there? Kind of almost looks like chunk came back as null. We'll see.
What is going on here? Get world chunk. What is our problem? Chunk. Whoa, that's weird. That is just bizarre. Get world chunk. Chunk is returning kind of garbagey values there. What has happened? Add low entity. Let's see here. So we're in this call. Is this the first? Where are we on this? Okay, so it's our first one. So let's go ahead and step in there. That's good. So we do our add low entity. Our add low entity is going to initialize that to essentially the invalid value. Then we go in to add it. It's going to do the add, and then it's going to try and call that change location. Well, that's true. So we actually have to also check to make sure that that is a valid value, and that the spatial. Yeah. So again, this is a little janky. Yeah, it's just a little not quite right, because you have two things that both represent the same value. You have the fact that it's non-spatial, which is a flag, and then you also have the fact that this p value can be set to an invalid value. It's a little janky, right? You see why I think that's a little janky? I don't know, maybe you don't see why I think that's a little janky, but...
Regrettably, Casey, I do not see it, because I just don't... I couldn't even appreciate why we needed to do this. I mean, what I can get the sense for, that he said initially, is that all of this code just kind of feels like it's stuck in terms of thinking about things the old way. I mean, the fact that I'm seeing this this low index stuff, I mean, maybe you need that anyways, because that's how you map it into the place where it needs to go next in the world chunks after its position moves, right? But anyway, it's just there's a little bit too much flying around right now for me to totally get what's happening at the moment. I just want my code to work. That's all I want.
Essentially, what we would have to do here for the catch-all is say, also, the p-value has to be valid, right? Both of those things have to be true in order for this to be set, right? And that would go this way. And I just don't love that. Like, I just don't love that concept. Oops, I did that wrong. Because, like, it just seems like... I didn't do it wrong. I just have to go set that in here. It just seems like I don't really like that idea. I never like having state stored in two places, right? It just invites errors where people set it in one and not the other. And so I'd like to think it through how I might get rid of that. It might be sometimes you can't avoid it, and so, you know, if it has to be that way, it has to be that way. But it just makes me unhappy, is all. But yeah, so all we have to do really is initialize the p to null position, and that solves the problem that we were having there. But it's just not fantastic.
All right, we'll see. Moment of truth. Oh, no. That's not supposed to happen. I guess it's good that we're not crashing, but I'm setting something to something bad somewhere. Oh, no. No, it wasn't supposed to go this way. Well, I think I just want to see what other changes Casey's going to make here, and then I might have to come back around and see why that happened the way it did. I feel like I'm just setting something to be invalid that shouldn't have been set to invalid, or I'm like passing in the null position somewhere incorrectly. We add the sword, that makes sense. When we add the low entity, that makes sense. Let me just check all of these calls here. Yeah, all of these are in here. Maybe I just didn't write this correctly. Shoot, I don't know. I really don't know.
Problem that we were having there, but it's just not fantastic. So yeah. Anyway, I don't know what exactly is going on with that guy. Let's see here. So I think that solved most of our problems. We just have a few weird things going on now. We start out centered wrong, and so I have a to-do in there to look at why, now that we're switched to simulation regions, we're centered wrong. And then the other thing that we have to do is what was I going to say? Oh, we need to update our camera code so that it follows the guy again. But again, we'll leave that low spatial thing for now. Maybe I'll put in a little note just as something to think about so that we don't forget about it. And when we're looking through things in future cleanup passes, if we have a good idea where we're like, this is how we could fix this, right? We'll fix it. So to do, it's kind of busted that P's can be invalid here. And we store whether they would be invalid in the flags field. Can we do something better here? And so, now might not be the best time to tackle that. It might be better to tackle that a little later on when we understand the structure that active and inactive, like simulated and non-simulated and stored entities are going to look, like how they're going to look and that sort of stuff. But it's just something that's on my mind and I don't love. So that's that. All right, so what I want to do now is go ahead and start cleaning up the rest of this stuff. Let's find out why the camera's not tracking the guy. That would be a good idea. So when we add a player, we're setting the camera following index equal to that player. So I think that should still be working, but we are not currently tracking the movement. So let's find out why. I thought we copied that code in here. In fact, we did. It's right here. So we should try to figure out, why isn't that working, right? So the entity itself, we want to figure out why this is never getting triggered, or if it is getting triggered, why it's not taking any effect. It looks like the reason is because the camera P never gets written back. Like we update new camera P here because we used to have a change call here, and now we don't anymore. So it may be as simple as just saying whatever the new camera P is, we could just flat out set it to the camera P and have that work. So I guess that's one way to do it. Let's go ahead and take a look. Now, yeah, now I guess that would be it. That would be all we have to do. Not sure if that'll work or not, but let's take a look. Why is my guy floating off into space? I think his DZ never gets updated anymore as well, so we gotta go take a look at that. Once he starts jumping, he never stops. All right, so that fixed the camera problem too.
Probably not going to fix my problem, but I didn't even totally see what he did there. So he just overwrote this right here, being assigned off of the stored position, and says that the game state camera P equals the new camera P. This definitely doesn't feel like it will fix whatever my problem is, but yeah. Things were looking fine, and then it must have had something to do with all of that change to this code here. Well, we didn't change anything in here. We only changed things in here. Where are all the places we're setting invalid P? I wonder if that's right. I wonder if something else changed here. And then over here, when we make the entity non-spatial, and we're only calling that in the update sword call, so I don't think that's relevant. Yeah. I don't know. I mean, if I just set this to be a V2, right, does that set us straight? Nope. Yeah, so something else got busted. Just wanted to see if that was zeroed out, if it would make a difference, but clearly not.
Let's go ahead and take a look. Now, yeah, now I guess that would be it. That would be all we have to do. Not sure if that'll work or not, but let's take a look. Why is my guy floating off into space? I think his DZ never gets updated anymore as well, so we gotta go take a look at that. Once he starts jumping, he never stops. All right, so that fixed the camera problem too. Let's take a look at why our DZ is busted. That's, I guess, probably something that's still... We never really did anything with Z, like I said before, but we might as well keep it working. So let's see here. So we have the DZ value. It should be getting updated in entities. It looks like, right? It's coming in through here. And the DZ value should be getting set. I'm not sure why it isn't. That's kind of odd. I wonder what the problem is with that. So if controller start ended down, con hero DZ equals 3, it looks like, what is con hero? Con hero, it looks like we never clear it, is the problem. So we never clear the con hero D request at all. And that's obviously going to cause the problem. Remember, we're storing the controller input now in anticipation for doing some stuff later. So that is pretty straightforward. That obviously makes perfect sense. Yeah. And still, that's a little weird. Why is it moving down in that? Yeah, so we still have some weird bugs going on here. All right, so assuming that the DZ is set to 0 now, I don't remember exactly.
Just wanted to go in and make that change. It was somewhere around here. Oh, over here. Yeah. Set that DZ to 0. And see what else is going on here.
How we did this control hero thing. So we have our DZ, we have our DSword, we have our DDP. Seems like all of those things probably want to be set to 0. Well, the DSword doesn't actually do anything. Well, no, it does. That's true. So we want to kind of zero this out, I think, entirely for now. We can think about how we want to do that exactly a little bit more in the future. But we want to zero those things out. And then when we come down here and we set those, yeah, so the entity DZ, we only want to update that DZ if the con hero DZ was actually set to something, right? Yeah, so we do want to actually say, as long as that is not a 0 value, then they're actually trying to.
Where is that? Is that... Well, it's down in the... Not the rendering code per se, but... this switch where we're just kind of preparing things to be rendered. I see. Yeah, we want to make sure that this is non-zero. Whoops. Before we do that, syntax highlighting is messed up again. And then we wanted to check that.
Jump. This is kind of janky. Again, we don't really care about this very much, but that restores our jump control anyway, so that's fine, because I don't know, we had that jump in there, we might as well keep it for now. So the last thing I want to do is figure out why our camera is, what's going on with our camera focus in general, like what's the deal with the camera location, why are we staring at not at the center of the room? And so I'm going to take a look at what's going on there, because I think we've got either a bug or just a misunderstanding in how our code is working, and so I want to take care of that. So we have done this to do, add logic to the sim region to handle unplaced entities. We have not done this to do yet, which is what we need to do now, which is figure out why the camera's a little wonky. So let's take a look at that. We know that at startup, we do set the camera, right? Or at least we were. Here is how we set the camera, right? We said new camera P equals this camera tile X, camera tile Y situation, right? There's our new camera P. And then we were adding monstars and familiars near there and whatever. We did all that stuff, right? So is it just because we never call set camera? It is just because we never call set camera. Yeah, that's exactly what it is. We had those change camera calls, we deleted them, I never put them back in. So basically we would want to do that, right? That seems pretty obvious.
Okay, so that was back in the main game code. Up here, what was it? Yeah, I think. Hold on. So this add monster code, we'll just move that down. So we do all this, and then we say, hey, game, you have a new camera position. I mean, there's no way that this fixes my problem. Yeah, we're still stuck in the middle of nowhere. We don't even see the hero. That is so messed up. But at least it's running, I guess. It's always like just this close, man. I was hoping it would be so straightforward to get this working today, but there was just like a lot of little things, a lot of tidying up of the whole simulation region change.
We would want to do that, right? That seems pretty obvious. That may be it, and that was it. So that's the entirety of our problem, it looks like. Yeah. All right, well, that's good. So now we should restore our sword functionality probably as well. Again, we started about 15 minutes late today, so to get an hour's worth of programming in, I'm going to go another 15 minutes certainly, and then we'll still do Q&A, so don't worry about that, but I don't want to do less programming than we were going to do. Looks like our sim region seems to be working pretty well, no particular problems. Yeah, everything seems to be restored, and so now we just should probably do our quote-unquote sword. Again, we don't have the sword graphic in yet, so it's just a stupid little rock, but gotta start somewhere. People probably fought with rocks back in the day. The other thing we should probably do sometime soon is get this sorting stuff in there, because sorting wouldn't be too hard for us to do, and that way we'd actually pass in front of these entities instead of behind them. Right now, things are getting drawn in whatever order they were added to the sim, right? And so that's not particularly useful. We want to be able to sort them so that things, I should occlude those trees, not the other way around. Anyway, yeah, I think we just need to take a look at what's going on with our sword because we never actually ported that code. So let's take a look at that. When we do our sword code, where is that? That's going to be in our hero control code, right? That's going to be basically down here where we do our entity type hero. When we take a look at that D sword, what we really need to do here is just, I guess, figure out what's going on with this guy. I guess our sword, the problem is we have to make the sword spatial at this point, right? So what we want to do is say, okay, if we had a sword, what we need to do is make entity spatial, right? And we want to pass this stuff in here. We want to pass the entity P as the position for him, and this is going to be the DP. So we already sort of did the work that we need to do here to make that happen. So I think that's it. Just telling it to make it spatial so that it participates in the sim properly. Yeah, and that looks fine. That looks like what it should look like. Although I am a little bit weirded out by why the shadow is so... Oh, the shadow's probably so dark because it's probably just a full dark... Well, I don't know. I'm a little... Doesn't that shadow look super dark to you? Why is it looks like it's drawing the shadow many times, or maybe there's already a shadow on the stone. I don't know, but it looks wrong to me. That looks wrong. So I'm going to go ahead and set a loop point here, right? I'm going to go ahead and just set a loop point so I can fire that and just leave it kind of firing there. And then I'm going to go in here and take a look.
Interesting. So he doesn't bother setting these things now. Why does he do that? I feel like you still want to set these things. Oh, because make entity spatial actually does that. So never mind. It doesn't just set the flag. That's right. It also will update these values. So it'd be redundant to do them there too.
What's going on? So here's my sword, right? And I'm going to go ahead and comment out the shadow bitmap entirely. So I think that sword really feels like it's getting drawn multiple times to me. That really does, right? That's what it feels like to me. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to see, are we somehow getting multiple calls? Is there somehow more than one sword, like getting drawn or getting added in here? I don't know. Because that would be pretty easy to do. And we might want to add some checking to make sure that since we're creating things in the sim region and then writing them back out, I wonder if we should add some code there to make sure that stuff doesn't get loaded in and written out twice, especially in the early times when we're getting the sim region working and might have bugs, right? So all right, let's take a look here. What have we got? When we do our update sword and then we do the push bitmap, what would be an easy way to do this? Let's say that we took the entity index here, like so, whatever the entity index was of this guy. Let me just go ahead and add that in to the location, the offset in pixels of that. So I'm going to do 10 times the entity index, like so, and I'm just going to run that, right? Oh, I guess that was too much. Never mind. So now you'll notice that I'm only seeing one of them. All right, so let's go ahead and add a fractional value in there. There you go. So we've got lots of entity indexes that are all the sword, apparently. And so that's no good. It doesn't make any sense. So we've clearly done something wrong. Probably, again, we have a bug with how our sim region, how our entities system brings in elements. We're probably not... I made that hash table specifically to prevent things from being loaded multiple times through the referencing system. I probably have a bug there, is what I would guess, although I don't really know. So point being, we now kind of want to go and check to see what's going on there. I think that's priority number one. So let's take a look. We now know that my suspicion was correct about the fact that these things are broken, and so we should be able to figure out why. So let's go into our handmade sim region and see. We know that we're having some kind of problem with multiple entities. We know we only ever created one sword anyway, at least we thought we did. And so I want to first do a very simple thing, which is try to add some stuff into the sim region code to guard against having multiple entities in the sim region that all map to the same storage index, right? And so one thing that I could do here is, for example, when we do an nsim, I could do something where I try to guard against that rewriting by doing a check on up and back loading, basically. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in here to, we already added these flags, right, in our handmade entity, right? What I'm going to do is I'm going to have a flag here, which is like simming or something like this, right? And I'm going to make that be a flag that's kind of at the end here. It's like a debug flag, essentially. What I'm going to do is I'm going to say that when we load something out, right, when we do our begin sim and we pull something in, so when we do add entity, right, when we do an add entity call, at the time that something gets added in, right, I am going to, oh, you know what? And we don't really, yeah, well, at the time when something gets added in, I'm going to say at that point, we mark it as having been, we mark its source entity as having been loaded in, right? So we'll say that we'll basically do an add flag, right, simming, to the source version of that entity, right? So the source sim version gets that flag added. And I also want to assert before I add it that it was not flat set, right? Like so. So basically, we'll assert here that it was not set so that we can see if we loaded something twice. And then when we write things, when we go through and write things out again, we will go ahead and clear that flag on the right. So when we go...
All right, so that's going to have to be done a little bit differently because we're using Odin's bit sets like we have all stream long. So we wanted to check the source entity, the source stored entities flags, and make sure that it's not already simulating. And we just say, hey, if you aren't already, go ahead and start simming. But we make sure we don't do it more than once. And if we do, this assert will catch it.
Things out again, we will go ahead and clear that flag. Right here, when we store it out, we'll basically do an assert that the place that we're storing it out to had that simming flag set. So we'll say, okay, let's assert that the stored entity had that simming flag set, and then we will clear it. Although I guess at this point, actually this call will clear it itself. So we'll go ahead and assert that it's not set after that. Okay, so those are just, again, purely, purely debug code. It's just there to...
Hold on. Assert.
And assert that it's not set.
It looks kind of like he was asserting that it was set before. Did I get that right? No. Okay. So now this should be off of the stored entity, and I think we're good.
Itself. So we'll go ahead and assert that it's not set after that. Okay. So those are just, again, purely purely debug code. It's just there to guard against bugs on our part and catch them earlier so that we don't have to, sort of notice them like we did with the sword. So let's see. Too many actual parameters for assert. Oops, that's just put the parentheses in the wrong place there. Let's see. What is it? Oh, this is supposed to be an address of. So let's see. Conversion from sim entity flags to uint32, signed, unsigned, mismatch. Oh, please. Are you telling me that this is always thinking itself is signed versus unsigned? That's really annoying. All right, does that help? Anything? Does this help? Basically, this is complaining because it's saying that conversion of entity flags to uint32 signed. It's saying that sim entity flags is signed, but I don't want it to be signed. I want it to be unsigned, and I'm not sure how to make it understand that, which is unfortunate. We can get around it by doing this, but that's really annoying. We'll think about that later. All right, let's see here. Too many actual parameters for macro assert. Same thing. I just cut and paste bugged that. Let's go ahead and do that there. Cannot use my conversion. That's address.
I see. He asserted that it wasn't beforehand. Or no. It was beforehand. Oh, that's weird. Well, I guess if we are for some reason pointing the camera at the complete wrong place, we wouldn't be tripping that. Because we're probably not pulling in any entities, and therefore we're not simulating any. So this loop probably isn't ever executing. It's just kind of stepping through and doing nothing every frame. So we want to be simulating, and then when we overwrite, well, that's kind of, yeah, no, that's fine. Okay. Yeah, that's so messed up. Like, where all, well, game state, camera, P. We're only setting it in these two places. It's almost like the add player code just got messed up, but I mean, when we go in here and add low entity, and we say that its world position is null, but we're passing in the position that we want it to be at, yeah, it's got to be somewhere in this change where things just went terribly wrong. Maybe this is supposed to be checking if it is non-spatial, but that doesn't make sense to me. It's messed up, man. I don't know. All of that looked right at the time, but clearly clearly not.
So now let's see if that catches our bug. I was kind of hoping that it would, and it does. So that's good. So when I went ahead and pushed the sword button, we got that assert of that simming flag, basically. So let's see what's going on here. During begin sim, it's pulling something in. So it looks like what's happening, if I had to guess, is our sword is getting pulled in both by the spatial query and by the reference. And so what I'd like to do is figure out why that's happening. Oh, you know what? I do know why that's happening. That's actually totally what would happen. Right now, we're not checking to make sure that we don't already have the entity when we do an add entity raw, which technically could happen, because basically all we did is prevent references from bringing in entities that were already brought in by references. But we haven't prevented spatial queries from bringing in entities that were already referenced by references, if that makes sense. So what we want to do is make it so that everybody checks to make sure that something hasn't already been brought in through the hash table before it does that, right? So what we would like to do is much like in load entity reference, where we check the hash entry first before adding the entry. What we want to do here is do that same check before we do this guy, right? So what we want to do here is say, let's make sure that whatever that storage index is.
Where did that check come from? Add entity raw. Okay, so I'm guessing that is like, was that the load? Yeah, the load entity reference. We got to do it here too. Here, right here. And then the get, yeah, this whole thing. Well, I'm kind of glad that this didn't work, because I was like not really clear on, I'm still not totally clear on what we get out of doing things this way. But I wasn't clear on how it was working just by trying to follow the logic with my eyes, which, you know, is yet another sign that I should quit procrastinating and set up a debugger. But the print debugging has worked okay so far, right? Right? So yeah, I think we'll just take that and then throw that up there. And then see where this goes.
Let's make sure that that doesn't actually exist yet before we go ahead and do this, like so, right? And the other thing we can do is now map storage index to entity, map storage index to entity. I think now should collapse into the add entity raw routine, right? Basically, this should now be done right here, because we already have that hash entry. We already know that it's there, and so we can just go ahead and use it. We don't have to look for it again, right?
Say what? He just made another change. Did he get rid of a procedure? Okay, so we do that check to make sure that we don't keep calling and loading that reference. That's fine. But what does he do after that?
Before we go ahead and do this, like so, right? And the other thing we can do is now map storage index to entity, map storage index to entity. I think now should collapse into the add entity raw routine, right? Basically, this should now be done right here, because we already have that hash entry. We already know that it's there, and so we can just go ahead and use it. We don't have to look for it again, right?
Where else were we even calling that? Oh, okay. So we just do that and replace that. So we get the result out. We make sure that the index is 0 or it lines up. Then we sign it, both the index and the entity. So yeah. Okay, fine.
And so that's fine. So that looks totally fine to me. Let's go ahead and try that. Get rid of that, right? And I think that should do.
Oh, we got rid of that assert. Yeah, and he got rid of the call. Okay, good.
Right? And I think that should do it. There we go. And that looks much better. Now we're only getting 1, which is what we wanted, and we're not hitting that assert at all, and so on. All right, so let's just clean that up a bit. Obviously, we want to get rid of that drawing change I made there. We don't want to be offsetting this by its entity index anymore, so let's go ahead and fix that. And similarly, we also want to add code to make sure that the, like, I don't know if you noticed, but if I hold down the key, it keeps resetting the sword. We want to make it so that if you hit the key, if the sword's already there, it doesn't relaunch the sword. Again, pretty easy to do now that we know whether the sword is active or not. Basically, all we have to do is take a look and say, all right, when we get it, if sword and, is set non-spatial, then we know that the sword is not in existence right now and can be shot. And so that's fine. And so now I can't do that anymore. I have to wait till it's done to fire again. So that's good. I think now we've fixed the to-dos that we had there.
Didn't quite catch that. So in here, before we do this and basically overwrite and reset the position, right? Yeah, that's a pretty straightforward thing. Yeah, we want to make sure it's not nil and what is it, the simming flag?
Then we know the sword is not in existence right now and can be shot.
Say what? That's all he needed to do? I don't understand why that's true. If non-spatial is in... Because it is spatial while it's being shot, is it not? Oh, yeah, okay. So if it's not... Well, no, I don't know about this one. Oh, yeah, if it is non-spatial already, then go ahead and do it. Otherwise, you need to wait until it's been basically made non-existent. Okay. The brain is fried. But it's just in time because the stream's almost over.
And so that's fine. And so now I can't do that anymore. I have to wait till it's done to fire again. So that's good. I think now we've fixed the to-dos that we had there. And we are back into good position with the sim regions. We've got a bunch of stuff we can do now too. The sim regions are working well and they allow us to do references and pull things through references. So I think everything's in pretty good shape. We have...
I didn't even see the to-dos. Which to-dos were those? Why didn't I see that before? Yeah.
The to-dos that we had there. And we are back into good position with the sim regions.
Okay, so that was like way down here, right? Couldn't find my cursor for a second. Okay. Yeah, well, I still need to figure out this, I think. But this, I guess, is good. We totally still have an issue, right? Because I cannot actually see anything. The game runs, and then it just kind of looks like the camera is pointing in the wrong place. That or all of the entities that, like, the camera could be pointing at the origin correctly, but all of the entities are being drawn in or placed into the world elsewhere, right, in an invalid position. So maybe this is just not correct. I bet it's that the entities are just all in the wrong place, and I guess I could verify that if I just printed out the camera P, right? Dang it. Just verify that that's the issue. That, well, I didn't mean to print that out that way. That is just really hard to look at. There we go. Right? Made the wrong call here. Yeah, so I think the camera is set to the right place. It's just that the entities are not. And so that just means I've got like a bad assignment somewhere to overwrite the correct position with a wrong position.
We've got a bunch of stuff we can do now too. The sim regions are working well and they allow us to do references and pull things through references. So I think everything's in pretty good shape. We have one more thing to do, which is the apron stuff, which I guess we can do tomorrow, which is this right here. So I guess that'll be what we'll focus on tomorrow. And that may be it for upgrading our stuff. Again, can't think of anything else that we really had to do in there. So that's pretty good. So with that in mind, maybe it's time to go to the Q&A. If you could, go ahead and prefix your question.
Awesome. So not not the greatest way to wrap up the stream again. You know, we ended just shy of being exactly where we needed to be to head into the next day, but I suspect that whatever this bug is, it shouldn't be too difficult to find, although those are, of course, famous last words. It'll just be, maybe it'll be something I have to look at on stream tomorrow because I can't figure it out by then. But if it is, that's okay. We'll deal with it. But I'm optimistic because everything else seems like it's coming out just fine, and I must have just not been paying attention and written in some kind of position assignment or passed in the wrong parameter somewhere, something like that. So we'll get there. I did see Gloob was took. Thank you for the follow about 15 minutes ago. And so we'll be back tomorrow for day 67, where we will make updates conditional. I'm not totally sure what that means, and I'm sure Casey will explain it all to us in tomorrow's stream. So thanks for hanging out with me for another day of Odinmade Hero. Have a good rest of your day, and I will see you in the next one.